Hey everyone, Paul from Adopt and Embrace. Welcome to the Adopt and Embrace YouTube channel and the seventh installment in our live read of Adopt and Embrace Microsoft Teams, a manager's guide to communication, collaboration, and coordination with Microsoft Teams. So thank you so much for joining us again for the live read, or if you're watching the replay later on. I want to make a special shout out to Susan in Canada, who's reached out via email just to have a chat around the live streams and go into some of the more of the content that we've been talking about in the live stream. So thanks for reaching out. If you want to connect with me or just have a chat about any of the content within the book or anything we talk about in the live streams, obviously you can hit me up on Twitter at Paul Woods. You can drop your comments into the chat or into the comments. Obviously on YouTube, we'll get back to you there. If you've got something specific, just send me an email, paul@adoptandembrace.com, and we'll see how we can help you or guide you in the right direction with that particular item or topic that you want to talk about. So this week, I'm feeling a little bit under the weather, so apologies if my voice feels a little bit raspy, but we'll see how we go through it. The interesting thing that's happening here in Australia, I don't know if it's similar around the world, but it seems like there's a lot more activity in the economy, let's say, kind of with the COVID pandemic going on. Which the impact on this live stream is that there's a lot more aircraft flying over our house over the last couple of weeks. And in particular today, we've had quite a lot of large, lower aircraft. So that noise might come through in the live stream, so apologies for that. We just had next door neighbor vacuuming and drilling and all the noises that you'd expect to happen just as you hit go live on a live stream has started to happen. So again, if you want to have the perfect quality audio experience, you want to hear this without a raspy voice, without those interruptions, head on over to Audible and grab the audiobook. It's a much better quality production than what you're getting right here. But what you miss out on an Audible is all the sidebar conversations and little bits and pieces we'll add to the book. In the last, there's a trailer going past right now. The things that have changed in the last, 18 months since we started writing the book, and particularly when it comes to Microsoft Teams. There has been some new capabilities and new announcements recently that are actually quite important for this. The chapters we're going to look at today around plugins and permissions. So again, if you want the good quality audio, head on over to Audible. If you don't have a copy of the book and you just want to read along and kind of take notes as you go through it, obviously hit up Amazon or go to Kobo or Barnes and Noble or wherever you get your books. You can either get it on their online store or order it in the physical copy or in the electronic book as well. And finally, we've got some new content coming shortly. So once we get through the live read of the book, we're going to be doing quite a lot of Ask Me Anything kind of content. We'll be answering questions of people around the world when it comes to Microsoft Teams, Office 365, adoption programs, and adoption strategy in general. So if you're interested in asking some of those questions that we can answer publicly through our YouTube channel, Instagram, LinkedIn, all that kind of stuff, or if you want to hear some of those answers, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now to make sure you can see all that content when it comes out over the next couple of months. So with that, what I'll do, we'll go into the book read for today, the live read for today. There's two chapters we're going to focus on today, and the first one is the plugins chapter. And I just wanted to call out Benjamin Elias, who used to be on the team. He's moved on from Adopt and Embrace now, but this is a chapter that he wrote. So thanks, Ben, for putting in the effort to put together a great chapter. This is his work, not mine, but I'd love to read you what he wrote in this chapter. So let's get into it. Plugins. Don't let the word scare you. Plugins is just a fancy way of us describing the things outside Microsoft Teams that can be used to add more context or customize your communication, collaboration, or coordination experience in some way. Microsoft Teams, quite deliberately, is meant to do a lot of things. To be suitable for a wide audience, it needs to be useful across different industries, across different team sizes, and useful no matter what type of work you do. If you think about it, it's quite hard to design a single product that is useful to a nurse, a contact center worker, a repair technician, and CEO. Yet this global appeal is what Microsoft Teams achieves. The key to achieving broad appeal is flexibility, and plugins is how Microsoft Teams achieve this. Just one question, one point here, I guess, in terms of plugins. Plugins is kind of like a phrase that we use at Adopt and Embrace to talk about a lot of things we'll talk about in this chapter. It's not an official Microsoft term in terms of how they talk about these things, but apart from the fact it fit in quite nicely with the 10 Ps, because it started with P, we think it actually is an easier phrase to use than some of the more complex terminology that Microsoft uses in some of their documentation as well. So you can either kind of stick with this approach we talk about here, or stick with the Microsoft one. Points for style, I guess, different ways you go about it. But we purposely chose plugins just to make it a little bit easier for people to understand. Okay, so key to achieving broad appeal is flexibility, and plugins is how Microsoft Teams achieves this. Rather than building in niche features that only students in a classroom or clinicians in a hospital or engineers in a construction company might use, the underlying product is a flexible blank canvas with core features that everyone will use. After that, it's up to your team to customize it to suit your needs. Plugins, tabs, connectors, bots, and extensions. This chapter will focus almost entirely on simple plugins that allow you to embed other products within Microsoft Office 365 into your workspace. We will also explore how to integrate web-based solutions you might already use. This is a good starting point for two reasons. Firstly, it means that this chapter will be relevant to you. The reality for a lot of our customers is that anything more complicated than a simple tab included in your channel requires a governance discussion with your IT team. Secondly, it allows you to have a principled discussion about plugins without getting distracted by the bells, whistles, and promises of shiny new apps. Start off with the basics and understand when it makes sense to augment your Microsoft Teams experience with other tools. Then you're in a good place to start experimenting with more advanced features, but only once you have an appreciation for what works. There's probably another plugin that we'll mention sometime during this chapter that's been announced recently called Viva Connections, or the home site app that some of you might have heard of previously. That's a good example of a more complex plugin that you might put into the Teams environment. For those of you who don't know what Viva Connections is, basically allowing you to place your corporate intranet or a similar kind of experience into the Teams app bar down the left-hand side there, with some global navigation attached to it. So it makes it easy for employees to get access to their leave entitlement information or policy information they have stored in the intranet, having that experience all within the Teams environment. Now, the vision of what that is amazing, and I think it's a really good outcome that I think a lot of organizations should consider, but we would classify that as one of the more complicated plugins because it requires IT to run scripts, to package the Teams app and install it into the Teams environment for you. So what we want to focus on here in this chapter is starting with some of the simple stuff first before we move on to some of those more complicated plugins that deliver value as well. What's in it for me? Plugins are a great example of a win-win, both for the people who use the product, you, and the product development team at Microsoft. The biggest advantage to using different styles of plugins available in Microsoft Teams is that you aren't waiting on Microsoft to create the features you want. Within reason, you can quickly collate all the resources your team frequently uses into a single shared Microsoft Teams window. You don't have to wait for Microsoft to develop, test, and gradually release new features. One of the critical wins from a change management perspective is that plugins allow your most common processes to continue as is. Provided there is a web interface, you can simply add your existing process website as a tab, and nothing much needs to change. People can continue to use the existing system in much the same way they always have, in the context of a collaboration space powered by Microsoft Teams. And this is probably one of the most powerful things. If there's one thing to take away from this chapter in terms of plugins, is that website tab or the browser tab that you can add to a channel is probably the most underrated but the most powerful tab or plugin that you can add to a Microsoft Teams channel. I think we use the example in the book coming up, but just being able to take your existing web-based processes or interfaces or experiences that you have within your organization, in almost every case, as long as it starts with HTTPS, you can have that framed into your team's collaboration space. And whether it's a third-party project management tool, a construction management tool, a HR system it's a software as a service style that's you access it through a browser, starts with HTTPS. You can use the tabs, deep link directly into those systems, and share content or processes or forms or reports that relate to the stuff that you're talking about in that channel. I'd say in almost every team that we work with, in almost every Microsoft team that is created, there is a use for that website tab or that browser tab to frame that kind of content in. So there's one thing you try off the back of this live stream, try thinking about those third-party systems that you use and how you can bring them into the space as well. The other side of the coin is that Microsoft can concentrate on developing core features of its product, avoiding being torn in different directions by feature requests and support tickets. It allows them to produce a product that isn't too bloated, so you don't have to worry about evaluating a long list of features you never knew existed and then deciding to enable or disable them. So let's take a look at some of the common plugins that you'll want to use inside your team. Let's get into the discussion about tabs. All right, tabs. Tabs are the mainstay of our plugin philosophy. Just like a tab in your browser window, a tab in Microsoft Teams allows you to switch to a different resource quickly. Think of a tab as a great way to bookmark a resource that is relevant to that channel. One word of warning, Keep it simple and just add 1 or 2 tabs that make sense for the channel. Adding too many tabs causes Microsoft Teams to collapse them into a drop-down. And in the book, we kind of have a screenshot there. Let's see if we can bring it up there. See how it has like 5 more and a little drop-down arrow there? So this is something to be conscious of. If you have lots of tabs or lots of bits you've added into your channel in that way, plugins you've added in, just pick the most important ones and make sure you order them so the most important ones are on the left-hand side. Otherwise, they'll be lost when you kind of run out of that screen real estate. If you have a widescreen monitor or you have a wide screen that you're working with, you've got a bit more real estate there, you'll see a few more tabs. But particularly if you're on a laptop where you might have a 14-inch screen or a 13-inch screen, it's kind of tightening it all together. If you're trying to access those tabs on a phone, as an example, which is a different user experience completely to what I just showed you on the picture there, if you have lots of tabs, it can just be a little bit unwieldy and hard to navigate. So try and keep it to 2, maybe 3 tabs maximum. Focus on the really important stuff that people will actually get value out of in the team. You can add a tab by clicking the plus button to the right of the tabs, which will bring up the available tabs or the available applications, I guess. We'll call them tabs in the book, but they're kind of the applications that have been approved by your IT team. Depending on your company settings, different tabs will be available, may be available. We expect the number of available tabs to grow over time, but practically speaking, you'll only be interested in a small number of them. Those would be the tabs relating to tools that you already use, and from time to time, that list would be a useful starting point for searching for new or replacement tools. It is all limited by your IT security settings, if applicable. This is one of the things we see a lot of variability across our customers is like what applications kind of presented as tabs that I could add to my channel in my team. So some organizations just have a very laissez-faire approach to this, which is look, anything that appears in that library of applications that you can add as a tab is fair game. And you'll see, there's the core Microsoft tools there like Word and OneNote and Planner and other bits and pieces like that you'll see there, which you're familiar with. And then a vast library of applications from developers you've never heard of or applications you've never heard of before. And some of your favorites will be there as well. Quite often we work with a lot of customers that use like Asana as an example for project management or task tracking. So they see the Asana app appear as a tab they can add into to their channel. So there's organizations that have a very laissez-faire approach. They have lots of different things there. On the flip side, there's organizations that lock that down very much and don't even allow any applications to be added there or just lock it down to, say, the Microsoft applications or applications that they've vetted or approved from licensing point of view, security point of view, data residency point of view and things like that. So if you are opening up your, adding a tab in Teams and you can't see the applications that you're expecting to be there, what I'd recommend is just have a chat with your IT team or your Office 365 specialists in your organization, just to understand the rationale behind why that application isn't presented as an approved application. And in most cases, there's going to be a really valid reason for it, but sometimes these decisions are made without the context of why the business wants to use these applications. So it's always good to have that conversation to see if you can get access to that capability or similar capability in a different product that's been approved by IT as well. So when to consider tabs? Not every channel or team needs additional tabs. There will certainly be times when the default chat and files tabs are more than enough for people to get work done in a channel. Consider a tab when the purpose of the team is clearly encapsulated in a go-to document or information source. You regularly refer to specific documents, spreadsheets, presentations, or videos, or the team uses web-based tools regularly and consistently. Notice that first bullet point there I talk about that the purpose of the team is clearly encapsulated in a go-to document or information source. The idea of using a tab could be a PDF tab or a Word document tab or even a OneNote tab to encapsulate curated content specific to that channel is a really powerful one. So for example, you might have a PDF which is, here is the purpose of our team. This is what we're talking about here. This is kind of the expectations we set for each other. Those principles that we talked about in the last chapter, in the last live stream, you could have that all documented in a document or a PDF and then have that as a tab within your team. So it's always there for people to access. An alternative could be you might have a team that's been running for a really long time and you might have here are the top 10 threads or the top 10 posts that we've had within this team that really highlight some of the key decisions or key discussions or just key outcomes we've been able to achieve as a group. And you might take the URL attached to each of those different conversations just by hitting the ellipsis on the conversation. Copy those into a Word document and then present that as a tab at the top of the list. So as new people join the team, those top 10 posts or those important conversations that you have, the links to them are directly there within that document. So the idea of encapsulating some of this important knowledge about your team or knowledge about your collaboration space into a document, adding it as a tab, is quite a powerful way to apply the tab style plugin into your team. So when thinking about go-to documents, there are two main categories. Curated conversations, where it is important but will invariably be let me get the words right today. Let me try one more time, sorry. Curated conversations, where a discussion's outcome is important but will inevitably get lost in the channel's conversation history. While the chat in Microsoft Teams is searchable, sometimes you just want to skip to the answer without needing the background. By all means, have a discussion, but collating important information in an easy-to-consume format and a known location is a much better strategy for knowledge management. Typically, that information can be placed in a OneNote, Word, or Wiki tab. Actually, a little side conversation here around knowledge management. This actually is even more important now, particularly if you're looking to explore Viva topics, which is the AI-driven knowledge management kind of curation capability, a discovery capability that Microsoft has launched as part of the Viva employee experience platform they've talked about the last couple of months. And if you're curating this content into documents, which obviously live in the SharePoint site, they become resources that then can be leveraged as part of Viva topics as well. So it's just something to consider if you're going on the path of Viva topics. This idea of curated documents could be quite powerful, not just for your team, but just broadly across for your knowledge management efforts across the organization as well. Right. So second category is regularly used resources, where the information needs to be bookmarked for easy access. This could be, for example, a PowerPoint presentation that is critical to the channel's purpose. This is often a matter of convenience. The document is probably accessible in the Files tab anyway. In the team that created this book, we pinned the draft Word document as a tab, as an example. All right. You'll know what external tools your team uses and which are relevant to the team's purpose. Each team's purpose is unique. So, for example, it makes sense to add a payroll software as a service product as a website tab for a HR team. Although they might also regularly use the same system, other teams probably don't need that payroll system to be a tab. The key thing to remember, oh my God, I just realized we've got a spelling mistake. Oh my God, a spelling mistake in the book. Should be the key thing, not they key thing. The key thing to remember when using the website tab to add an external software as a service application to your channel is that the URL or web address you're pointing to, the tab to, needs to start with HTTPS. Some tools might have created their own dedicated tab, which you may find in the growing library of tabs displayed when you add a tab to your channel. Otherwise, it's perfectly acceptable to use the website tab to streamline access to web-based systems. Even if the tool has its own plugin, you may choose to pin the application as a website anyway if the plugin doesn't have the required functionality. And just one thing to consider with those app-based tabs that you see from some of the vendors, they only do maybe a certain subset of what you have in the experience of the website application. So just compare and contrast what you get through the website versus the application that you can add as a tab. If you get more out of the website version, then maybe just use that browser or website tab to frame in that application as opposed to using their dedicated application. Right, when to avoid tabs. Part of the value of Microsoft Teams is that people get the same shared view of the team. Native Microsoft tabs generally don't allow you to break with this philosophy. For example, you can't add a list from a SharePoint site other than the SharePoint site associated with the team, because some people in the team might not have access to it. Well-designed third-party plugins should continue this approach. It is, of course, possible to break this design philosophy, and it's quite easy to unknowingly do this by adding a website tab. Any website that requires a login opens a possibility that some team members don't have access or might have different permissions in that external system. And that's a really great point here, is that the beauty of Microsoft Teams and using the built-in features of Microsoft Teams like SharePoint and Planner and so on, is that security model of whoever's a member of a team has access to these resources is really tight. But as we start using the browser tab and some of these other tabs that you can add in as add into your team, if that permission model or permission to access those resources isn't tied to that Office 365 group, then there will be situations where you need to manage permissions elsewhere to allow people to get access to it. And the classic example, if I go back to the Asana one again that I used earlier, is if you have a project in Asana that you've tabbed into your team, you need to add people to that project in Asana so people in your team can actually see that content. Otherwise, I'll just see a login box if they see that particular website there. If they don't have a username and password into Asana, they can't get access to that content. So just making sure that you're trying to keep it simple. If you're adding resources into it, just be conscious of who has access to those resources to make sure that everyone in your team that needs access can have access to the content that you're sharing. All right, let's talk about the go-to tabs. All right, the first one is going to be OneNote. This is perfect for semi-structured knowledge management in teams. As a place to put static content, OneNote is very effective in a team context. For example, if members of your team are involved in meetings across your organization, by using the shared OneNote notebook within your team, you can consolidate all of the meeting notes into one shared place. In fact, a OneNote is one of the standard resources created by Office 365 when a new team is created. The alternative to a OneNote tab is a wiki, but in our view, OneNote has far more functionality. For example, 2 or more people able to edit at once and version history being 2 advantages, especially as you can directly open the Teams notebook from the OneNote app on your phone, tablet, or computer. Now, I talked about the browser or the website tab being really important at the start of this live read. The OneNote tab, or just using those shared OneNote notebooks, can absolutely transform the way that your team works together in that informal, unstructured knowledge kind of way. To give you a real-world example of how we use this within Adopt and Embrace, for every customer that we work with, we have a team created for them, and then every channel is a project that we work on. It's really simple information architecture. And we have that shared OneNote notebook for each customer, which means that if I'm taking notes when I'm working on a customer about a particular project and someone else is working on a different project at a different time, all of our notes about the work that we're doing with that customer all consolidate into that one shared notebook. So it means that if someone joins our team halfway through a project, if we need to go back to other project notes in the future, we're not going to individual OneNote notebooks and trying to find what I said or what someone else said or what notes that we took in those documents during those meetings. Sorry, it's all in that one central location in the shared notebook within the team. So OneNote, great example of a go-to tab, but it has a lot of power here in terms of just rethinking how you capture that unstructured, organic information that happens throughout the workday. So next tab we're going to talk about is Planner. Planner is a lightweight project management tool, the sweet spot between using Excel to track tasks and building out a work breakdown structure in project. Planner is more interactive in the sense that you can encourage people not only to consume the task schedule, but also to contribute to it as well. For example, updating the completion status for their tasks. Planner is obviously relevant for a team where the problem at hand is related to coordination, but it's important to remember that it's a very lightweight tool. Most notably, it doesn't include versioning or a permissions model, so anyone can update any task, and there is no way to see what the previous state was. Let's talk about the Planner tab. Since we wrote the book, there's been another tab added to the library of Microsoft's kind of go-to tabs. It's Microsoft Lists. So some of you might be familiar with lists in SharePoint, and over the last 12 months, Microsoft have basically beefed up the capability there and released a new and kind of relabeled it as Microsoft Lists. And I think for some customers, some of the deficiencies we have in Planner can be overcome when you start to use Microsoft Lists to track some of those tasks or track some of those issues or track some of those things that might be important for your team to think about. Lists is that nice sweet spot between just listing content, about different things we need to focus on, and adding metadata to those different items to allow you to track progress, track stages of something going through a particular process, assign tasks to people, filter and sort information in a way that makes it meaningful for you. So if you're thinking about project management or task management and you've been using Planner and thinking, well, I don't think Planner quite meets the needs of what I'm looking for, and you started to explore other third-party tools, what I'd recommend is having a look at Microsoft Lists and see if that can actually help you build the perfect kind of structure for how you want to manage that or coordinate that particular task at hand. So next one I'll talk about is forms. If you have any information capture or survey needs, you can quickly add a Microsoft Form tab to your channel to enable that data collection to occur. A simple surveying tool, Microsoft Forms can be used to collect information both inside and outside your organization. Both the form design and the responses are available via the tab, enabling quick access to the insights you are gathering. You can then export the data to an Excel spreadsheet. My favorite use of the Forms tab is when we're delivering workshops and we want to have some interactive element to a workshop. We'll add a tab to the channel of the team where we're kind of facilitating the workshop. We'll do the kind of structure, the form how we want it to be. We'll send the link to the participants where they can kind of add in their response during a break, or we might have a 10-minute activity where they need to do the activity in Microsoft Forms. They either click on the link, or we'll put a QR code up on the screen so they can do it on their mobile phones as well. And then when we bring everyone back together as a group, we just hit that responses tab, the responses part of the forms tab, and we can go through the responses with them one by one. So it's a really quick, easy way to gather information, but then kind of present the information back very quickly in a live, real-time environment as well. So if you haven't had to play with the forms tab in Teams, I'd recommend you check it out, particularly if you're a facilitator. We use the forms tab multiple times with the beta readers for this book. When we ask them to confirm their participation and agree to the gives and gets of being a beta reader, when we ask them for feedback on the design concepts for the cover of this book, and this was definitely far better than some of those concepts that we sent to them, by the way. Some of them were horrendous. I don't know why we even sent them in the first place. And when we wanted their final feedback on the book itself. All that information was available to all the co-authors of the book just by clicking on the tab in the beta readers channel, and not hidden away in another survey tool. Right, let's move on to other plugins or tabs we have here. So Yammer. It could be a subject of its own book. The arrangement of a complementary team and Yammer community is one that many teams will find appealing, but it does require a bit of explanation. Very briefly, the team is for the core team and is the engine room for work. The Yammer community is used for outwardly sharing news and knowledge about the work that the core team is doing with interested parties across your organization. Conversely, feedback from the Yammer community can be imported and discussed in the more private team. Adding the Yammer tab to a channel in your team enables this to happen more easily. I agree. We didn't actually cover this much within the book, the idea of Yammer and Teams sitting closely together. We generally have a philosophy between Yammer and Teams is that Yammer is really great as a culture platform, bringing your organization together, talk about values, shared goals, mission of the organization, direction you're going in, things that impact people across your organization, and bringing people together across your organization, irrespective of team, location, seniority, that kind of thing. So Yammer does a really great job of bringing that together. Teams is where we do our work, and we focus on particular tasks, actions, projects, activities that we need to do day to day to actually get our jobs done. And together, that's a really powerful combination. When I want to focus on my work, I just purely put myself into the Teams application and kind of do all my work there. If I want to step back from that work for 15 minutes and just have a break from that and then think about our organizational goals and missions and how I fit into the bigger picture, I can flip over to Yammer and have that conversation there. We like to think of it as like the different rooms that you'd have in an office space, when we used to go to offices, right? So, a big conversation, a town hall meeting with the entire organization happens in the big room, the conference room over there. But the small focused project conversations happen in these tinier, smaller rooms where we can have a lot more focused energy in what we're doing. So basically having those two things separate gives us the appropriate spaces to have the conversations and have a meaningful conversation without them distracting us from each other. Now within Teams, we can start to integrate Yammer into our team as a tab. You can add a tab to the channel to kind of give you a view of a particular community that you might have set up within Yammer to do that. There is a ability to add in like a Yammer application in the team, so you can just get access to the Yammer. Having Teams is the hub for teamwork, and just as one other place you can go through the application bar down the left-hand side there as well. So just something to consider. The other thing that just talk about briefly within Teams, there's a lot of organizations that go, well, we don't need Yammer because we can do an all-organization team, or we can have an all-organization team or multiple organization teams, multiple all-organization teams within Teams. And what I'd say to that is just be careful of putting all your eggs into one basket with Teams and trying to have that all company conversation happening within Teams. Some of the downfalls that we have when you have an all company conversation in Teams is that as a team member of an all organization team, I can't remove myself from that conversation. So I'm always going to be exposed to it and kind of be distracted by it potentially as well. The second thing is when we think about Yammer communities, we almost instantly think about having a community management layer over the top of that, someone that curates that conversation, ensures that it goes in the right directions and things like that. Very rarely are we seeing in organizations that have gone down the path of an all-organization team, have they applied this community management methodology or approach to how they curate the conversation that occurs within that all-organization team. So what they end up being is more of a broadcast mechanism to the organization than a true community that you want to have a clear two-way conversation or multi-way conversation with people across the organization as well. So I could probably ramble for hours about Yammer and Teams and how I think they work quite nicely together. But we might save that for another webinar. Probably put a panel together and have a discussion about it. It's probably worthwhile doing that. All right, so let's go into the next plugins or tabs we'll talk about. So Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. It's probably a little unfair to put the rest of these in the same bucket, but from a Microsoft Teams perspective, the tabs perform much the same function. Use these to pin documents that are frequently used in a channel. Practically speaking, this only saves a few mouse clicks. You can always get to the same document through the Files tab, but the people who like organization and structure will thank you. And again, the example we talked about earlier of like the principles of your team and how they come together, those curated conversations, you can do that all with Word or PowerPoint tabs. Excel is really handy if you have a spreadsheet that your team accesses regularly. It could be your leave roster, it could be the budget for your team, it could be the latest monthly report, whatever that is. Again, that just having that tab there that says monthly report, and then that links directly to the Excel spreadsheet just helps remove again those clicks to getting to those files that you use fairly regularly within your team. So let's change the conversation away from tabs. Let's talk about other bits and pieces we've got here. So we've got apps, bots, connectors, messaging extensions, and tabs, custom tabs. So this section is for people who are confident with the basics and want to dive into something more advanced. If you don't think a ready-made tabs fits your needs, this section briefly touches on what's available if you're game to try it. Try creating a Teams plugin for yourself. If this is not you, then please skip this section. Now, when we're kind of getting into the section about those custom-made plugins or custom-made tabs, connectors, extensions, and things like that, Microsoft's investing a lot of effort into this space at the moment. They're really seeing Microsoft as an application development platform to enable you to embed your business processes and work practices into Microsoft Teams. So if you're genuinely interested in building your own tabs or plugins or connectors or extensions, whatever we'll talk about here in the book in a second, there's lots of documentation out there. There's also lots of Microsoft partners that have been kind of working with Microsoft to build their capability to help customers achieve this as well. So if you work with a Microsoft partner already, make sure you reach out to them just to see if you can get some advice or guidance around these things as well. That might just help you take a few shortcuts to get to where you want to get to. We've seen some incredible custom-built applications on Microsoft Teams, and I'm sure there's going to be more of them coming over the next couple of years. So it's an interesting, kind of exciting space to watch. So first, let's get to the fancy and confusing word. Sorry, get my words right again. First, let's get the fancy and confusing words out of the way. In Microsoft Teams, an app is something that includes at least one of the following: a bot, connector, messaging extension, or tab. An app can include more than one of those things, and the most common combination, if you had to include more than one, would be a bot and a tab. There will be times that people are less precise with their language, and when they say app, they probably just mean bot. Next, let's understand a little bit more about what these things are. Bots. Bots are software programs that interact through a chat-based conversation. In Microsoft Teams, people can interact with bots in a channel, in a group chat, or individually. Most of the bots we hear about today are set up for individual chats, effectively a user-friendly search or discovery interface. For example, you could ask a bot, "What is my leave balance?" Or, "What is the address of our office in New York?" Other examples of bots are those which encourage a check-in or response from an individual. An example could be a workplace health and safety bot, which sends out an "Are you okay?" question if a safety incident occurs on a work site. Another example could be teaching and learning bot, which checks in with students throughout the semester to gauge their understanding of coursework and to suggest additional reading for the areas they may be struggling with. Actually, that little comment there was inspired by some amazing work from an academic at the University of New South Wales, Dr. Kellerman. If you just search for Dr. Kellerman and have a look for QBot and some of the stuff that he's been doing with teams in terms of teaching and learning in university engineering classes, if you haven't seen it, it's incredible. So make sure you check it out. Bots are emerging as useful tools in the workplace. However, they do require a keep it simple approach. As the complexity of your requirements increases, so does the complexity of building and maintaining your bot. Actually, I don't think we talk about it in the book, but Ben, who wrote this chapter, actually built quite an incredible bot for us. It was probably the most important, pivotal bot in the entire history of our organization, and that was CoffeeBot. And basically, he built a bot that would help us manage the coffee run for our team. So back when we had people that would regularly be in an office, We had a Teams bot where basically someone felt like doing the coffee run. They would just type in a message to CoffeeBot, and then CoffeeBot would go and ask all of the team members what their order would be for the coffee run, and then randomly select one of our team members to go and do the coffee run itself. So it's a kind of simple idea of just how do we automate a collaborative process with some technology to help us just streamline the process. That coffee bot that we built, that Ben, I shouldn't take any credit for it because Ben did all the work on it. He did a presentation at Microsoft Build a couple of years ago. So if you just search for Ben Elias, Microsoft Build, and that presentation from Build hopefully is still online, you can actually see the process he went through to build the coffee bot within Microsoft Teams as well. Another thing, I don't think we mentioned it here because I think we wrote this book before. Yeah, we did. We wrote the book before this came out, particularly around bots. There's some new capability that we have in Microsoft Teams kind of based on the Power platform. And there's one thing that you could look up or have a look at called virtual agents, Power Virtual Agents. And what this allows you to do is a simple way to create an interactive chatbot and have it sit within your team. Now, there are some limitations with when we do it within Microsoft Teams, part of Project Oakdale or the broader Dataverse kind of announcements that Microsoft made probably 6 or 7 months ago now. Yeah, Power Virtual Agents, if you want to have a quick, easy introduction to doing bots within Teams without having to crack open Visual Studio or anything like that to create your own custom bots, yeah, have a look at Power Virtual Agents. Quite easy to get up and running. And for anyone who hasn't coded before but has some kind of logical mindset, you can kind of put a hierarchy of conversations together. It's actually quite an easy way to get that bot capability into Teams pretty quickly. Then you can go and do the more complex stuff after that once you've tried it with Power Virtual Agents as well. So check that one out. So let's talk about connectors. A connector is a way of bringing external events into a channel within your team. Through the lens of adoption, this is a bit of a conundrum. The assumption is that the work continues in the external system, despite the need to import these notifications into Microsoft Teams. Yet there is often nothing to complete the loop between the two systems, taking a response in Microsoft Teams and feeding it back into the system that reported the initial event, which brings into the question of what work is being done in Microsoft Teams as a result of this connector, because work presumably is done in the external system. And a good example of kind of explaining this issue is if anyone's used there's the ability in Microsoft Teams to email a channel. So if you haven't discovered this before, if you go to a channel in Microsoft Teams, you click on the ellipsis, the 3 dots, and then you'll see get email address for this channel. You can basically forward emails into a channel or send emails directly to a channel, and they'll appear in the conversation that's there. The challenge with that is if you wanted to reply to that email to the people that sent it, we can't do that from Microsoft Teams. We're just having a conversation about that object that's been plonked into the channel that we've been working on. Connectors kind of work in the same way. So if you've got a third-party system that's sending a notification into your channel, a lot of those connectors out of the box don't really have a way for you to interact back with that source system to kind of update that status or action that task or things like that. So we just need to be careful with connectors, just thinking about where do we want work to occur, what role does Teams play in that work? Is it just purely just a broadcast mechanism to notify people to go back into that third-party system? Are we wanting people to do work in that particular channel? All those kinds of things. So just some things you need to consider when using connectors. There are some better connectors out there that do kind of broker that interaction back into the third-party system, but they vary depending on the products that you're working with. So yeah, just have a think about that as you start exploring how you use connectors within Microsoft Teams. The exception is if the external event is generated without human involvement, for example, an outage notification that might require discussion about the event in Microsoft Teams. For this reason, we would suggest that connectors be used sparingly and only where they add to the purpose of the team. Even then, a connector can potentially end up confusing people about which systems they should be using to get work done. Messaging extensions. The easiest way to understand messaging extensions is by examining how the GIF selector works. If you're reading this well after, let me start this again. This is a really good joke that Ben put in here. If you're reading this well after the book was first published, GIFs are a hilarious way of communicating using short animations back in 2019. And as we've seen during COVID, they've probably been the lifeblood of a lot of teams and conversations and sharing emotion when we haven't been able to be face-to-face as well. So probably, they've probably got a lot of longevity on them beyond what we thought in 2019 as well. When you want to add a GIF, Microsoft Teams opens a dialog box with a search bar and suggested GIFs for insertion. After searching, you can select a GIF to insert it into the message. So more generally, a messaging extension allows user interaction, for example, the dialog box, before inserting content into the message. So if I kind of replay that, because I kind of distracted with the story about Ben, is that a messaging extension, when you go into Teams, you've got those little buttons down the bottom there when you're kind of doing a chat or adding to a conversation. It allows you to basically add some additional capability that helps you create the message before you send it. And the GIF one's a good example of that. You press on GIF, you can search for the perfect GIF to add to your message, and then you plonk it into the message, then hit send. That's basically how a messaging extension works. But imagine that with your corporate information, maybe accessing a patient management system so you can get patient data or student data into a conversation if you needed it. So there's kind of quite powerful ways you could use messaging extensions to add a lot of business context to a conversation if you needed to. Theoretically, the value of a messaging extension comes from its ability to include context from an external system directly into a conversation. In GIF Selector, that external system is the library of GIFs. For example, you might have a third-party patient. I just said all this without even thinking about it. You might have a third-party patient management system, student management system, or a customer relationship management system, and you want to add some additional information from that system into the context of your conversation. Instead of having to switch to the other application to find out the high-level information, you can have it automatically populate in your conversation as a message or card. Let's talk about custom tabs. Since almost any website can be added to as a tab in Microsoft Teams using the built-in website tab, you may be wondering about the point of creating an app with a tab. The short answer to this is that it provides a smoother user experience, particularly where the app includes other elements, like bots and connectors. When it is integrated through a dedicated app, the external system is sent information about the user and team context rather than having to rely on a separate login. In order to allow a smoother user experience, the tab needs to meet certain requirements, including running various Microsoft Teams specific scripts. Or in other words, if you don't have control over the system's HTML, then you won't be able to develop a tab. The perfectly acceptable workaround, if you don't have control over the source, is adding a tab using the built-in website type. Can anyone create a new plugin for Microsoft Teams? If you or someone in your team has some development or coding experience, you could create your own bot, connector, messaging extension, or tab. Check out the Microsoft Teams Developer Center, which is at developer.microsoft.com/en-us/Microsoft Teams. But just search for Microsoft Teams Developer Center, you'll find it, which includes guides, templates, and training to help you create a plugin that meets your requirements. Ultimately, Office 365 administrators have control over which apps people can add, regardless of whether they're published publicly or developed internally. Before embarking on developing your app for your team, it's worth checking that internally developed apps are allowed within your tenant, or that at the very least you can have that you have a process to engage with governance decision makers and potentially specifically allow your app. That's the end of the chapter. Before I get into the key takeaways and the end of chapter checklist for this one, in hindsight, there's one bit here we completely missed in this chapter. And it's kind of probably a consequence of timing more than anything. But it's the role of the Power Platform, or Power Apps in particular, and Power Automate in how you can augment your core Teams capability with some amazing custom experiences, processes, and things like that using the Power Platform. So just quickly wanted to talk about those two things. Power Automate. There are so for those of you who don't know what Power Automate is, it's basically a workflow engine or an automation engine that comes with Office 365. So we can automate some really simple tasks. If you've used tools like if this then that before in your public life, or Zapier or things like that, Power Automate, which used to be called Flow, you might have heard of it, it references Flow before, allows us to just automate and sequence certain tasks, activities within the Office 365 environment or with other systems that we interact with. Some of our favorite plugins, if you want to think about it that way, that we use with customers today is by leveraging Power Automate to create experiences around a team as it's created, or how people are onboarded onto Teams. So as an example, if you have a employee onboarding team that people join when they start at your organization, we can use Power Automate to sequence welcome emails and welcome messages to those people throughout their first 3 or 4 weeks in that onboarding and induction team. So being able to use Power Automate as a plugin to add that additional capability to the experience you're creating in Microsoft Teams, incredibly powerful. So make sure you check that out. The other one is Power Apps. Now, Power Apps, some of you may have come across before, some of you may not have. It's basically, as Microsoft would position it, a really simple, low-code, citizen developer-driven way to develop an application, whether it's in Microsoft Teams or not. But it has a really special relationship with Microsoft Teams that allows you to do some stuff pretty quickly and add some pretty interesting experiences into Teams as well. So, for example, we had a customer recently where one of their legal team used Power Apps to create a simple matter management database system using Power Apps as the interface, all within Microsoft Teams. And within a couple of days, actually had it up and running in a simple way for them to manage really complex legal matters as they're going through their team and kind of have situational awareness of what's going on as well. So if you've kind of used applications like Access before, or if you're really proficient in Excel, chances are you'd have a pretty good go at building some stuff in Power Apps quite well. So if you want to have a look at Power Apps, just search for Power Apps on the internet. You'll find lots of great examples. There's plenty of videos on YouTube exploring how you can create your own simple Power Apps or more complex Power Apps as well. The other one that I mentioned during the live read there was Power Virtual Agents. Again, a great way for you to start to experiment with bots before you go into building custom bots that you deploy across the entire organization as well. So if you haven't had a chance to look at the Power Platform, Power Apps, Power Automate, Power Virtual Agents, and some in Power BI that a lot of you might be familiar with already, some really great capability that's very easy to add into your team's experience as well. So let's talk about the key takeaways, apart from we completely ballsed up and didn't talk about Power Platform. We should have in the chapter. Add tabs to teams as bookmarks for content, resources you want to get to. Only add tabs where they are relevant to the purpose of the team and channel. Even if your software as a service product has a Teams app, don't assume it will have the exact functionality you want or need. And don't get caught up in the hype of apps and bots. Think about the other P's first, and plugins become the icing on the cake. Again, a bot or a technology won't solve some of the fundamental work design, collaboration design challenges that you may have if you don't design your team really well. So get the design and the foundations right first, and think about the plugins on top as the icing on the cake. And the end of chapter checklist, in your 10 Ps workbook that you can get from teamsbook.info, write down up to 3 things that will add context to each of your channels. It could be a document, notebook, spreadsheet, video, or third-party system, and then add them as tabs to your team. And remember that you don't have to have a team in every channel. Sorry, you don't have to have a tab in every channel. So just add stuff that's relevant. Don't try and overwhelm people with stuff. All right, so just looking at the time, so we've got enough time because the next chapter, permissions, is reasonably short. So we'll go into the permissions chapter, which is one of the later Ps in the 10 Ps. This is really just talking about making sure we have the right security and controls in place to make sure we can use a team effectively. So permissions. I'm wondering if you can help me, Helen. Asked a client on the phone the other day. Oh, sorry, Helen wrote this chapter. I can tell by the opening introduction already. I'm wondering if you can help me, Helen. Asked a client on the phone one day. I'd received a bit of good news about a client and decided to give him a call and speak to him rather than send a message electronically. Besides, as a remote worker, I wanted to chat with someone. I hoped that I could catch him at his desk or that he answered his phone. Amusingly, I thought, that's the danger of the modern workplace. When people don't answer their calls, let them go to voicemail. To my delight, he answered, and as we laughed about the old-fashioned approach of having a phone discussion, the conversation was light-hearted and friendly. He used the opportunity to ask the question that was concerning him and his business team about how some external team members, who are not part of his organization, could not access a team plan, so a planner plan within Microsoft Teams. These people are from another company. However, they work closely with our internal marketing team on joint projects. They can't seem to access Planner that assigns them the tasks and activities they need to do. They get an error message. Looked at all the permissions of both Microsoft Teams and the Microsoft Planner, but it has us stumped. They just don't see what our people see. Any recommendations on what we could do? This problem made me think about how our work happens as part of a team and how sometimes we forget the people, teams, and companies that are outside of our organization and with whom we need to work to achieve business outcomes. If they sit outside our organization and are still part of the project team, are they still considered part of our team? Of course they are. However, in the past, this was hindered by the considerations of technology and platform limitations between the parties, as well as the security of the information. For example, imagine an internal marketing team working with an external advertising agency. The agency may be using other suites of products within the Google or Apple ecosystem and will need to send information back and forth to their corporate client, who may be using the Microsoft suite. Meanwhile, the corporate organization may need certain information from their advertising agency and will need them to use their own systems. This is where Microsoft Teams comes into play. Both parties can communicate and achieve their team outcomes by accessing the team space for discussions, as well as links to the relevant files for that project. It reduces the need to email information back and forth between parties and duplicate the effort to input information into different ecosystems. This means that for team members to collaborate and work together on projects, they all play different roles within the team, and as such, will need to have different permissions for access and use of information that is in the team. This is the topic of this chapter. How to define permissions in Microsoft Teams. The topic of defining permissions is likely to generate some discussion when you first set up your team, because you'll need to have a clear idea of not only the purpose of your team and the problem that you're solving, but also the people who are part of your team. These people may sit both inside and outside your organization, and yet, as a team member, Microsoft Teams does not distinguish this. A team member is a team member regardless of whether they sit inside or outside your company. You'll need to consider what information is available and what can be made available to them, and then make an assessment as to whether you need more granular control over who has access to files and other content. An example there, you might put a private channel in place where you don't invite those external guests into that particular channel to kind of lock that down a bit. So ask yourself, do you want external guests accessing all company-specific files in that team? Do you want sensitive and private conversations between parties available to everyone in the team to read and comment? Do you want team members to be able to edit or delete files and conversations in the teams? Permissions in Microsoft Teams. What are the permissions that you can set for your members in Teams? You can create and update channels. So let me phrase this properly, because this is a big long bullet list here, so it's difficult to read out. But basically what we're looking at here is all the different permissions that we can control for a team member versus a team owner versus other guests that you might have in the team as well. So here are the specific permissions we have an opportunity to set for members of the team. So the ability to create and update channels, the ability for members to delete or restore channels, to create, update, or remove tables, to create, update, and delete connectors, add and remove bots, where everyone can delete their messages or everyone can edit their messages. So you might have in a team where you want to control whether or not people can edit a post. So you could have that control that you set that says no one can edit their post within this team. We can say, yes, we want people to edit their posts. It's a permission you can set on a team-by-team basis. When we think about the general channel, we can control things like whether or not anyone can post messages into the general channel, or you have to be a team owner just to do it. Or anyone can post, but we'll have a little alert there saying that if you post in this channel, there'll be a notification that goes to everyone. Or that only owners can post into the general channel. In terms of guest permissions, particularly those external guests coming into the team, we can control whether or not they can create channels themselves, whether they can update channels or allow guests. We can actually say if guests can delete channels or not. And what I'd recommend is making sure your guests can't delete channels as a starting point, just generally. I think that's the default option anyways. One thing here about use of mentions. So do we allow members of our team to @mention the team? Because that'll send a notification to everyone in the team. Do we allow @channel mentions to send a notification to everyone who has favorited or followed that channel from being mentioned? Will we allow the use of GIFs within the team? Will we filter out inappropriate content settings and things like that? So you've got a big long list of little permissions we can set on a team basis or on a channel basis that control whether or not people can put controls in place in terms of the types of behaviors that people will have within the team. So what I'd recommend when you go into your team, when you set up your team for the first time, is just go to the settings of that team, work through all those checkboxes, and just remember, think about which ones of these are important based on the purpose of the team, the problem you're solving, the kind of interactions you want to have within that particular channel. Most of the time, the default settings are okay. So it's not the kind of thing where we need to go in there to lock it down straight away because it's going to be a nightmare afterwards. But there are some circumstances where, in a school environment, for example, you might not want students to be posting into the general channel because you're using that as your announcement channel, as an example, where you might want to put some of these controls in place to make sure that you can still, have the kind of experience that you were expecting for the participants in your team as well. All right. We recommend that when you're working with your team that you encourage them to go through each of the above permissions and explore the following. Does this permission allow our team member to do what they need to do without adding additional work, frustration, or obstacles to achieve their team outcomes? Does it provide them with the right level of access and authority in their role in the team? Does it allow them to access information we are comfortable to share with them? That is it aligned with our company IT policy around file sharing? The other thing we haven't mentioned in this book around permissions is that there's quite a lot of controls that your IT administrators or Teams administrators can put in place for Teams as well. And they do that at a tenant-wide level, or they can use policy to apply it to different parts of your organization, or different roles within the organization, as an example. So these are just some of the examples you can do as a team owner, but there's other permissions that can be put in place. We don't cover that in the book, but if you want to find more information about that, and it's probably something to be worthwhile to be on top of, because these things change quite regularly as well, the kinds of permissions you can apply as a Teams administrator. Just search for Microsoft Teams permissions or Teams Admin Center permissions on your favorite search engine, and you'll find a lot of content available from Microsoft and others in the community about that as well. So the summary for the permissions chapter. Determining permissions is not an onerous task, but it does need some consideration when it comes to considering the roles of the various people in your team and what you want them to do, as well as what resources you want them to access and be able to share. Too often, we may forget that our teams are also made up of external agencies, contractors, vendors, and suppliers who need access to the resources to allow them to undertake their side of the project. In this case, Microsoft Teams allows different access levels to ensure that teamwork and collaboration can still happen without jeopardizing sensitive company data. The key takeaways from this chapter are: determine the tasks you want your members to do and assign them owner or member roles to achieve that. For external team members, determine what resources they will need access to and assign access accordingly. Ensure you have more than one team owner per team. Ensure that your team owners are aware of their additional responsibilities and adding new team members and creating and deleting teams. And our end of chapter checklist: as a team, decide on the settings that will create a safe and productive space for collaboration and coordination to occur, and then note your decisions down in your 10 Ps workbook. So with that, we're actually making some pretty solid progress through the book. We're probably 2/3 of the way through it now, which is great. So thank you for coming along on our live read journey as we've gone through the book. Next week, we'll be focusing on the performance chapter. When we talk about what does success look like, and measuring success of our team and the collaboration experience we are working through. This one here was also written by Helen, and I remember when I did the live read of this chapter, I struggled with one sentence in here and one story, I think, which took me about 47 different times to get it right. So if you want to see me struggle with one particular sentence, tune in next week and you'll see me do that as well. So next week we'll talk about performance. We'll probably go into the provisioning chapter as well. We talk about how to create different options we have about creating teams, particularly around options we have in terms of automation or templating and things like that. If you have teams that you want to create regularly, that provisioning chapter is quite important as well. So performance and provisioning next week. Thank you so much for joining again this week. Really appreciate it. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop them into the chat or into the comment section below the video. If you like this kind of content, you want to see more of this content, you want to see the videos next week, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make sure you hit like if you enjoyed the content here today, because that just helps us get a little bit more distribution and get the ideas that are in the book out to a few more people as well. So we appreciate that as well. So with that, I'll close the live stream for today. Thank you once again, and we'll see you all next week. Have a good one. Cheers.